Today we're in New York at the offices of the global professional services company Deloitte, which are here in the Rockefeller building. And we're talking about innovation and disruptive technologies, which are here to stay. Now, how quickly and how well banks and financial services businesses adopt these technologies will determine who survives and who doesn't. With me now is Bob Contry, the Global Financial Services Leader for Deloitte. Welcome to the Business Debate.
Thank you very much for having me.
So technology is the biggest thing affecting your clients at the moment in the financial services sector. So in what ways is it affecting them?
Sure, it definitely is the biggest issue right now. Certainly over the last year or two, it's really accelerating. For 5 years prior to this, the focus was really all about regulation coming out of the financial crisis, and there wasn't a lot of money in a lot of our clients to spend in technology. But now, as they're coming out of regulation, it really is about technology. And I would say it's in two areas. One would be the customer. So how do you serve your customers better? How do you provide products and services primarily online and through digital channels to your customers? And the second would be efficiency. There's significant opportunities to use technology to automate manual processes, to make more efficient processes that were put in very quickly during the financial crisis, especially in the middle and back office. So a lot of opportunity.
And is it better to partner with a FinTech firm or to develop your own solutions? And what would make you decide one way or the other?
Yeah, I think the key is for a large organization is to think of themselves as an integrator. So most FinTechs have fairly narrow products that are focused on solving a specific problem. And most of the problems of large organizations are how do they make their end-to-end processes more efficient. And there are virtually no FinTechs out there that can solve that myriad of problems. So large organizations need to think of themselves as integrators. How do we weave together or knit together internal capabilities with the capabilities of maybe 4 or 5 FinTechs plus large technology firms and have them all come together to solve the problem?
So the research firm Gartner estimates that a third of jobs are going to be automated by 2025. So how much does that sort of play into banks and financial services companies' decisions when they're deciding to use bots?
Yeah, I think it's a big issue, and frankly one that the industry hasn't spent enough time thinking or talking about yet. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs across the financial services industry globally, many of which are in the middle and back office that have the potential to be automated by these new technologies. And those are positions that will likely be eliminated. Now, I think there are significant opportunities to move many of those people into more high-value customer-facing roles, which would be great opportunities for them and great opportunities for the organizations to provide better service to their customers. But at the same time, there will be many jobs that will be made redundant or replaced by technology. And I think the large financial institutions and the industry has an obligation to their employees and to the workforce. And there's just a whole social question about what they do with all these employees going forward.
And distribution is changing too, so that when people buy their loan or their insurance, they tend to identify with the retailer rather than provider. And how is that affecting your clients?
Well, I think that's a critical point because it's critical for organizations that want to be leaders in the future to stay connected to their client. And if they are not providing leading edge products and interaction capabilities directly to their customers, they're going to lose that connectivity, and they're ultimately going to be disintermediated into the middle and back office, and they will lose the direct client connection. So that's why, to the first question you asked, much of the investment that's being made by our clients is in the front end so that they can maintain that customer interaction and that customer intimacy, which is going to be critical for them to differentiate themselves in the future.
And technology is really helping with regulation and compliance, isn't it? How much is that affecting your clients?
Well, it's definitely helping clients deal with regulation. I think there's a huge, very significant opportunity. Over the last 5 or 7 years since the financial crisis, large financial institutions have had to add a lot of cost and a lot of people to address regulatory and compliance concerns, rightly so, and to put new processes in place to address these concerns. Much of that was done very quickly and therefore manually. And so there's a very significant opportunity now for large institutions to use technology to essentially automate many of these processes, or at least make them much more efficient, because most of them were put in very quickly to satisfy regulatory requirements, and they didn't have the time to really put a lot of technology in place.
And we've got what we call financial regionalisation developing now, where banking just doesn't mean one thing the world over. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to that. One is banking is taking very different forms in different parts of the world. You hear stories or you read articles about Africa, where markets like Kenya, where more than 90% of the banking transactions are done via mobile phones. You certainly don't have that same level of adoption in more established markets. And I think the difference there is about the level of infrastructure. So in more mature markets, the adoption is slower because people are used to using legacy infrastructure, whereas in the emerging markets, we've jumped right to the next generation of technology. I think the other is the willingness of the regulators to adopt the new technologies. So in more established markets, you have regulators that have regulatory regimes that are built around existing infrastructure, and they want to be comfortable with understanding how the new technologies are going to satisfy the regulatory requirements of the industry before they agree to the wide-scale adoption of these new technologies.
And the bigger banks used to have economies of scale, didn't they? But now some of the newer disruptors can operate very cheaply. They're online. Right. And so how can the more established players compete?
Yeah, I think the more established players have some advantages, right? They have a brand, they have trust, they have customer service, so they can compete on a number of dimensions. But the fact is, over time, their competitive advantage will certainly erode if they can't close the price gap. So that's why it's really critical that the established players leverage these technologies as quickly as possible to drive down their cost to deliver. They may never get to the price point where the startups are. They likely won't, because startups don't have the same level of bureaucracy, infrastructure, administration, and that costs money. But closing that cost differential is really critical, so that then clients can decide whether they want to use the existing players because they like the service model, they like the trust associated with them, et cetera.
And how willing do you think the financial services sector is generally to embrace technology?
I think it's very willing. I mean, financial services has always been a technology-driven industry. It's always been very focused on automation, and I think that most large financial institutions understand that this is the future, right? So they're all in some stage of adoption. The real question is, what's the pace of change, and how are they going to basically be able to adopt these technologies as quickly as possible? But there's no question, everybody views this now as really their top priority and is moving down this path.
And there's no one who's kind of completely got it sorted, because you have to change, in another couple of years, don't you?
Everybody is kind of down the path, but everybody's in different stages. Some people are quite advanced, and I would suggest that partially that's a function of how quickly were they able to pivot out of the regulatory agenda. Part of it is just culturally, some organizations are more innovative than others, but everybody is starting to head down this path. And I think the critical question is not how quickly you can head down the path, but as you head down the path towards the new technologies, how do you start to change your organization? Because what's really critical is that you continually are able to adopt and adapt to these new technologies, because the pace of change is not going to slow down. And so they have to build flexibility into their organizations. They have to really build an organization structure that allows them to leverage these technologies going forward, because what we think is the best technology today may be completely overrun by something else in 3 to 5 years. So flexibility and adaptability are going to be key going forward.
On that note, Bob, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.